what I have to say about chapter 13 is going to sound a lot like what I mentioned about in chapter 18, or chapter 8. Chapter 8 focused on evidence and using evidence to support claims. And one of the major types of evidence you use in pretty much any writing class are sources. So chapter 13 is about the sources. So if it feels redundant, I apologize, but it's really important information. So hopefully you're getting new things about it because it's specifically focusing on using outside sources as evidence. But it's probably going to feel pretty familiar. So just wanted to give you that heads up. So the purpose of using sources in your writing is to add credibility and authority to your writing. And when it comes to credibility, it's your credibility. As a writer, if you can show your reader that you can work with the thoughts and writings of intelligent people, if you can put them into your writing seamlessly and just move from one to the next, it just adds so much credibility to your skill as a writer, because it does take skill and it takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of practice to be able to do that perfectly. So this is a great time in English 101 to start honing those skills and working on your credibility, because when you don't use sources well, it hurts your credibility. But it also adds authority to your writing, because instead of your reader just going, oh, this is just some person writing randomly about this, it makes them think, oh, well, they've got really good sources who have a lot of authority, and since they're using them so well, they have a lot of credibility. So they go kind of hand in hand in adding to your paper. Of course, sources are evidence that you need to put in your paper to support your ideas. It's, with paper number 4, part of the assignment, but that's what you need. You need to substantiate your claims with evidence, and outside sources, most of them are probably going to be written, but of any type, a video or a speech or something, they all lend support to your ideas. And then lastly, they help you expand your understanding, just like with the saying that people who teach something learn much more than the person who is taught that material. It's the same thing with you. You're going to spend so much more time researching and reading and analyzing and integrating sources into your writing that you're going to have a much better understanding of what you're writing about. And that's a good thing. Your reader's going to just get the bits and pieces you're able to pull out, but as a whole, your understanding of your topic should expand quite a bit. So sources help you enrich your experience. The conversation analogy is extremely important. It goes back to the idea of letting your evidence speak. You also need to have your sources speak. So when you throw in a direct quote, you need to explain it. You need to introduce it. You need to integrate it into your writing seamlessly. And that's your job as a writer. It's not the reader's job to try to interpret what you want them to get out of it. It's your job to explain it. So that's why it's a conversation. You are conversing with your reader, you're conversing with your sources, you're having your sources converse with each other. So it's very important that you work everything in together very well and very cleanly. Every time you have a quote in your paper, you need to introduce it somehow. Something as simple as so-and-so says, he continues, just something quick, because when you don't introduce a quote and you just have it standing alone as a sentence, it's just, well, it's ugly. But it shows that you don't know how to converse with your sources. So you want to introduce each quote somehow, in some way. Sometimes you're going to have a fraction, a small part of a quote embedded in your sentence. That's fine. It's the same thing. You don't always have to have so-and-so says, he then says. That's just my really quick, short example. But you can have a long, complex sentence and just have it thrown in there. And then it's worked into your writing just fine. And then once you use a quote, you need to explain it. You don't have to say this quote means, but in the sentences following the quote should direct your reader as to what that quote means, what they're supposed to take from it, how it relates to your topic, any of that. So you need to explain it somehow. So for every quote, you need it in your sentence somehow. It can't stand alone as a sentence, whether it's embedded in your sentence or introduced somehow. And then you need an explanation following each quote. Make sure you only quote what is absolutely necessary. I'm pretty sure I mentioned this with chapter 8. It needs to be a quote that you couldn't put in any better words. So if you quote something silly that is very easily paraphrasable or summarizable, I don't know if those are even words, but for today, they're going to be. So if you can't summarize it or paraphrase it, it should be a quote. If you can, you shouldn't be quoting it because your reader's going to scratch their head and say, really? You couldn't rephrase that? And it hurts your credibility. So only quote what's absolutely necessary. Think of really powerful statements. That's what published writers are good for, to add power to your writing, and you still get the credit for knowing to put it in there and having it in there properly. And lastly, you want this conversation to be a chain of thinking. As you move, your whole paper should be a chain of thinking. You should be introducing your topic to your reader and moving them through your entire paper, and your sources help to do that. You're showing that you can start at one point and grapple with this idea and look at different perspectives and aspects of it and then conclude. So it's a chain of thinking, not just a, I'm going to think here and think there throughout. You just want one continual thought going through your paper. That's why flow is so important. That's why I harp on transitions so much. It is the writing part of that chain of thinking. If you can't show your chain of thinking well, then it's not going to be as strong. So these are the 6 strategies that the book lists in terms of analyzing sources and how to use them. Make sure your sources speak. We've covered that about that in chapter 8, and having them not stand for themselves and stand alone, but you have to do your job in explaining what they do or what they mean to your reader. You want to attend to the language of the sources. That just pretty much refers to making sure you pick out really good sources that you quote, otherwise paraphrase them. So look at how the language of each source contributes and what you need to do in order to fit it best into your paper. Make sure that you analyze your sources continually, and seeing how they play into your paper. You don't want to just go, I think this, so-and-so says this and agrees, end of story. You want it to be a lot more complex than that. You don't always have to use your sources to provide answers to something. You can use it to ask questions. To me, that kind of feels like using it as a lens, using your reading as a lens. You can do the same kind of thing with saying, well, so-and-so said this. What about this? And then you continue on. You don't necessarily have to stop being conversant with your sources and having your paper and your sources conversant with your reader. You can also have them working with each other. Sometimes that can be considered synthesizing, when you have multiple sources working toward one perspective or one idea. You have multiple sources working together to find something, and that can be really cool too, because as you get higher in your level of education, that just shows complexity on your part, complexity in your thinking and in your writing. So it's really cool when you can have multiple sources, like within the same paragraph, talking about one thing. And make sure with your sources you always add you can add your own perspective. What do you have to say? That doesn't mean narration, but what thoughts can you add to those sources and to those ideas? So don't let your sources do all the work for you. Use sources wisely, use them well, put them into your paper nicely so that chain of thinking is not broken and the flow of your writing is not broken, and just move from one idea to the next with your quotes in there. Yeah, it's just one big happy fest if you can accomplish that. But of course, that's a lot easier said than done, huh? So that's kind of all I wanted to add to the textbook about sources. So There's some really good examples of how to use sources well, and I think even some on how to not use them well. So make sure you take a look at those. Even if you're just skimming some of them, if you find some examples that you like, then read them more in depth. But make sure you're comfortable with working with sources, because that's a really important part of composition.